Welcome to another episode of the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane. I'm Jeremy Munson. I'm here with Walter Hudson again, and we are going to dive into talking about the state party chair race. Now we have another election coming up in a month. Talk about what it takes to have a great party chair, what's required, what should we be doing. We'll also talk about the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus, or the lawsuit against the Minnesota State Fair. To allow guns to continue to go into the fair. And we will get into talking about the anti-vaccine mandate rallies that have been going on around the state and weigh in on some, we'll talk about what the conservative position is going to be on the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane. So, Walter, it's been we've had a busy week. Our last podcast, we talked about the state party chair, Jennifer Carnahan, now former state party chair. We now have a vacancy at the head of our party. A lot of people have been talking about who should run, who should we be requesting run. In my opinion, in short, the party chair that we really need doesn't want the position. The people that really want to be party chair are usually the people we shouldn't be voting for. What is your opinion? What does it take what do we need right now in the qualities of someone to step in and take over and get us back in shape?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that the ideal candidate is a unicorn, someone who just simply does not exist. And it's not because the qualities required don't exist in any potential person. It's that, as you said, I don't think such a person would want to do it. You look, we're conservatives, right? We're familiar with market terminology and dealing with economic reality. What's the value proposition for someone to run to be the party chair, and more than that, to actually become it? You know, if you were actually bequeathed this responsibility of being the next chair of the Republican Party of Minnesota at this moment, uh, I would have to send you a card with my condolences. I think um, this is not a position that someone rationally should want at this point, because you are walking into a crap storm. You are walking into. I mean, let's look historically, just at the past few chairs, going back to Tony Sutton. Tony Sutton, who that has held that position, or even deputy chair at this point, who has held either of those positions has gone on to do anything of note since. It is a political dead end. You go to be the chair of the Republican Party of Minnesota, there's probably nothing else you're going to go on to do after that. It's pretty easy to see why. The party has a historical trend of failure statewide that's not likely to change anytime soon. It also has a snowballing record of scandal that has only gotten worse. And the tendency has always been, and I think to some extent always will be, to place the blame for everything that goes wrong in the conservative movement and Republican politics in Minnesota at the feet of whoever the chair is. And so for you to actually want to step up to do this means, one, that you have to not have any aspirations to go on to do anything else in politics, because you likely won't have the opportunity. And two, that you have to be like, it has to be like the purest form of altruism, in a sense, where you're willing to forego to just heap scorn upon yourself and attract angst and derision and scrutiny on the outside chance that on the other side of it, you won't be any better off, but the party will be. I don't know who that person is who's willing to do that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. I guess there are some advantages to being party chair. Let's look at the advantages. And this is kind of unfortunate advantages because um, one of the things that it does is it allows you to get involved with politics all across the state. So if you're just working as an activist in one area, now you're going to be in charge of the whole state. You're going to be going around, you'll get to know the state. And I think that people running for party chair have an idea that maybe they would like to run for higher office, statewide office. When I first met, I met Jennifer Carnahan at the 2016 RNC convention in Cleveland. But when she became party chair, I was the first district chair, and when I met with her, um, you know, she had basically, well, what do you want to do as party, as party chair? I'm like, well, I just want to win. I want to win Congress, right? I want to win. I want a Republican Congressperson, and I want to get rid of Tim Walz, who was my Congressperson. What do you want? She wanted to run against Al Franken in 2018. That was her goal. So she wanted to run for party chair, build a statewide, data list, donor list, and, raise her name statewide so she could run for Senate. But as you said, that's not a great stepping stone to be party chair because you're likely not going to win statewide races. So some people running may see this as a way to raise their name awareness so that they can run for higher office. But as you pointed out, they have to take the blame for losing, and we've had a terrible track record. I think we're 0-21 for statewide races. So that's difficult to do. Stepping into this and having all of these sexual harassment claims to have to settle or to deal with all that, it's probably about the same level that we've dealt with the last 8-10 years, where we've had $1 million, $2 million in debt for the party. I mean, how I thought about that. When you have a party that was 1 million or 2 million in debt, how hard is that to fundraise? Because the donor's going to say, well, what are you going to do? Just throw my money into the hole, in the void, to fill what you don't we could paying back stuff from 4 election cycles ago? Or are you actually going to use it to win this year? Because I'd rather give to the candidates versus paying off legacy debt. um, so it's difficult. I think that especially when you just paid Carnahan almost $40,000 to give her a golden parachute when she, well, didn't deserve it. People are gonna be It's going to be difficult to give to the party. Unlike the Democrat Party, the DFL in Minnesota, that's like a machine. All money goes to the state party through the DFL, whereas the Republican Party is fractured, and we have, as we mentioned in the last podcast, the Senate caucus, the Senate Victory Fund, the fundraising arm for the House Senate, for the Senate Republicans. You have the HRCC raising money for the House uh, legislative seats. Then you have the party. Then you have the NRCC, raising money for Congress, and then the individual campaigns. So it's going to be a difficult lift for anybody jumping into this role. There's a few people that I think would do a great job. I even mentioned your name, Walter. I thought you would be a great person to step in and run the party. Um, we David Fitzsimmons was mentioned. He would be great. Matt Dean, I think, would be a fantastic candidate if we could get him to come out of legislative retirement to step in. I think we need somebody that's going to work with the outside groups and the House and Senate and the NRCC. You need somebody that's going to get along with everybody, the Freedom Club, and at least be non-controversial with these groups. You can't. We got to have less Republican on Republican violence going into the next election.
I don't know if I entirely agree with that. Certainly, let me put it this way: is that the ideal? Do we want to have a situation where there's zero Republican on Republican violence and we're all rowing in the same direction? Absolutely. That is the ideal. That should be the goal. It's not the reality. And I think whoever steps into this role, and indeed whoever steps into any party leadership role going forward, is going, particularly given the dynamic that you just outlined, right? The fact that we are balkanized, and that's not going to change. We're not going to become the DFL. That's not going to happen. We're going to have this distinction between those interest groups that represent the establishment, that represent the incumbency and their interests, and the grassroots, which is what the party is. And you've articulated very well and frequently on this podcast the dynamic between the likes of Kurt Doubt and whoever the chair of the party happens to be, in particular Jennifer Carnahan, but also going back to Keith Downey. There is an antagonistic relationship there. And I don't think that's going to change unless the next chair of the Republican Party is also an establishment hack, which is not ideal for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is it's not going to be representative of the base, the delegates that elect that person to the position. And so, what I think you need is you need somebody who is going to embrace reality and is going to embrace the fact that they are the leader of the grassroots arm of the conservative movement in the state of Minnesota. And that as such, that means that we are going to be, some extent at least, at war not only with the left and the media and all of the institutional forces that are out there in the culture, but we're also going to have to fight against our own establishment, our own incumbency, and hold their feet to the fire. And I think that that's a message right now that you've let's say, and I'm not making any announcements here, and I honest to God don't have any inclination to take this job because for the reasons I articulated just a few moments ago. But if I was, this here's the pitch that I would give. This would be the value proposition that I would offer. We have to recognize that the party just suffered an extinction level event. We need to behave as though we are starting from the ground level with absolutely nothing, because for all intents and purposes that's where we're at. Morale is shattered. The donors feel like suckers for having ever contributed to this mess. And so the only way we're going to rebuild is to establish two things. Number one, that whoever's in charge at all levels is trustworthy and has integrity and is going to be honest and is going to be transparent. That's number one. And then number two, that the direction the party is going in is a direction that is worth contributing towards. And in this moment, that means that we are committed to taking institutional ground and to destroying our cultural enemies, of which we have many. That has to be the rallying call. That will get people interested. That'll perk people up. People will be like, "Ooh, I'm interested in that. I want to be a part of that." And that's step one. That is the ground level. The ground level is I want to be a part of that. And right now, people don't. People don't want to be a part of this. And rationally, they shouldn't at this point. So you have to give them a reason to even be interested in starting, and then we can build from there.
Well, even people that were involved and were engaged and were delegates or like, fifth district, or fifth congressional district central delegates where they get together in small groups to run their district party every month. They elected somebody to the executive board to help run the state party. And that person signed a non-disclosure agreement, wasn't even doing their job. I mean, people that were entrenched in committed to the party feel violated by what happened. So they're also turned off. And you're right. We need to start over. One of the most important things that I'm looking forward in the chair, actually, two things, and one's actually we can debate this one. I don't know what the salary of this person should be. Carnahan said she was going to do it for $60,000, and then we find out that the state executive board must have granted her a salary raise, but she was making like $150,000 a year plus commission. Plus she spent 100,000 or $200,000 a year flying around and going to all these events. And nationally, we saw stories of her going to Las Vegas for the caucuses in Nevada. What for? Why would the party chair from Minnesota bring staff out to the caucuses in Nevada to party in Vegas? That doesn't get people in Minnesota elected. And so we need to rein in all the spending. And I think that somebody could run and say, you know what? I'm not going to take a salary. So that's 2 years of, call it $100,000 or $80,000 a year that normally somebody would run and get. That's a huge amount. And it's not just the $200,000 in salary. It's when we fundraised, right? We talked about that. It's it's like $800,000 of fundraising after paying all the fundraising costs. It's a huge value proposition for somebody running and saying they're not taking a salary. At the very most, I think we should pay them what legislators get paid, 42,000 a year or something, for a salary. The other thing that I think is really important is that we pick a state party chair who is not going to be the selected chair for one gubernatorial candidate. We have 5 or 6 people running for governor who are running for the endorsement, and the endorsement in the Republican Party matters. And so if they find a chair who's gonna put their elbow on the scale a little bit for them, and steer donors their way or whatever, it will make a difference. And that's what I fear. So right now I'm looking at the people jumping in saying, are they a Gazelka person? Are they a Jensen person? Are they a Benson person? Who is this person? What camp are they coming from? And trying to figure that out.
Well, and that goes to the first point that I raised in terms of the value proposition, which is integrity. A key, I mean, look, voter integrity as an issue, election integrity as an issue is huge within the conservative movement right now, especially in Minnesota. And so you tie that into this process. You say, look, my number one priority as chair of the Republican Party in Minnesota is going to be to ensure that you have total confidence in the integrity of your endorsement contests. I want to have zero idea of how things are going to turn out. I, because I have total confidence that all precautions and maximum transparency has been put into place to ensure that this is a fair and recorded and transparent process, so that all observers and all interested parties can have total confidence in the results. That is an absolute must, and it goes a long way towards rebuilding the trust that's been lost under Jennifer Carnahan.
Well, in my history with Jennifer, when I was CD1 chair, um, we had, see, Jim Hagedorn had ran against Walz and lost, and he was running again for the endorsement. And Senator Carla Nelson wanted to run for the endorsement. Nels Pearson, I think Aaron Miller had expressed interest. We had potentially 4 people running for the endorsement down in CD1. And evidently Carla, because I'd supported Jim in the previous election, he was the endorsed candidate, she didn't want to call me to get the delegate list for CD1. So she was calling Carnahan saying, "Hey, can I get the delegate list? I want to run for Congress." And for a couple of months, um, Carnahan was steering her, saying, "Well, you should probably run for U.S. Senate instead. You'd be a better candidate," and trying to get her to run for U.S. Senate. And she's like, "No, I want to run for Congress. I want to run for Congress." Well, after 2 months of Jennifer delaying it, and Senator Nelson saying, "Look, then I'll go to someone else in the party." She finally decided to give it to Carla and then say, "Well, just so you know, I'm dating Jim Hagedorn," because they were still dating in secret at that point. So, as chair of the first district and a friend of Jim Hagedorn, I was on the executive committee and I went up and asked for her resignation and forced a vote on it in the committee, because I said, you have two options. Either you stay out of CD1 because of your influence, dating one of the candidates, or you have to resign. You either you shouldn't be handling any of the money coming for the congressional races, because I don't, because she meets with the NRCC weekly. And I said, I even used the example, I would hate to see Jason Lewis lose by a small percentage and have Jim Hagedorn win, and you sent twice as many mailers to CD1. And that's precisely what happened. No, not accusing anybody of anything, but you need to withdraw from this. And she wouldn't. And so I asked for a resignation, and that vote went down. But, I was a supporter of Hagedorn, but I still wanted to make it very open and fair for all candidates to run. And that is what we need. Is, it's important. And I'm not running for party chair, but it's really important that you have somebody that's, you can support somebody. We know he's a Jensen supporter, but he's going to be fair to all candidates, give everybody equal access, and not have state party resources out there supporting one candidate. We saw probably the most damning stuff on Carnahan, which wasn't even part of her resignation, is that she possibly was meeting with the the Pawlenty campaign after Jeff Johnson got the endorsement, but before the primary. That's like, you don't do that in Republican politics, and yet that's sounds like that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, you need to have it needs to go beyond just like best practices. It's not even enough to not have a conflict of interest. You have to remove all appearance of impropriety, especially now. Especially now. Like the part of the I keep going back to this term, but it's so key. Part of the value proposition is the plausible premise that you can trust this party, you can trust its operations, you can donate with you, and it's not as though we're coming in off the street, starting from zero. We're at a deficit of trust as a result of what we've endured over the past few years, and so the bar is set higher as a result. The level of integrity that needs to be evident at a surface level, at a cursory level, is so high that we can't afford any sort of plausible suggestion of favoritism, or a lack of transparency or any of that stuff. And again, it goes back to the question of who is this person who can basically portray themselves as an angel that's above reproach. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. Well, like I said at the onset, I think it's we're going to have to recruit the right person. And nothing against any Jim Newberger has announced that he's running. I served with him in the Minnesota House. He's pretty conservative, although I did kill his bill in committee and on the wedding barn thing. So for that, I'm sorry. But the um, I think that he would be he'd be in a good position to run the party. I think most groups like him. Um, but we'll see. We'll see who comes out of the woodwork and who we should recruit to put him in that position. Um, hopefully, hopefully we can repair, and hopefully we don't have somebody that's like temporarily appointed. Like, well, we're gonna run. This person's gonna take over for a few months, and then we'll get somebody later because we are campaigning for 2022 now. The gubernatorial candidates, the AG candidates, Secretary of State, they're all out there campaigning, and we need to start building the volunteer base that it's going to take to win. Because I believe that we win by door knocking. That is really the key thing. It's person to person communication, and you can't send mailers or run TV ads just to win elections. I think voters are wising up, and they need more information. Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus today had got a ruling for a temporary injunction that they had sought to prevent the Minnesota State Fair from banning guns. A lot of people didn't know this, but for the last 160 years of the state fair, um, people have been allowed to bring guns there. People have been bringing guns there. Obviously, when the fair started 2 years before the state was even a state, people brought the guns to the fair. And it wasn't until the 1970s that Minnesota passed a law requiring you to get a permit to carry a gun with you in public. And it was pretty restrictive, but those people could still bring guns to the fair. And then in 2003, Minnesota passed a law that we became a shall issue state. So then your county sheriff had to issue a gun unless there was reason not to. And now we have hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans that carry guns. Now, most of them carry them concealed. It doesn't mean you have to, but most people do. If you were to visibly see every gun that was out there in public, it would probably scare most people because that don't like guns because they are everywhere. And once you recognize how to see the imprint of a gun that someone's concealing, all of a sudden you start seeing them everywhere. And it makes me feel safe knowing that so many people are carrying a gun. Make other people feel unsafe, but they were there with you at the Minnesota State Fair, and even though there was some sign saying you can't carry them, people I know carry them. Even talked to sheriffs at the fair and said, "You guys can't stop us from carrying guns," and no, we can't. We just don't say anything. And it wasn't until this year that they installed metal detectors, and the gun owners caucus sent letters saying, "Are you guys really going to prevent people from carrying because you can't?" And they actually passed the rule like they should have if they wanted to ban guns just this summer. So they finally did officially ban guns. Then they filed a lawsuit, but the judge kind of basically said it's too quick a time. It's not enough time for us to rule on it. So they're going to deny the temporary, the injunction, and allow the rule to stand banning guns. And while they litigate this thing, even though the media reported that they lost. They didn't lose the case, they just lost the temporary injunction.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I noted, and I'm bringing up the Fox 9 article that talks about this ruling from the Ramsey County District Court judge as we speak. Everything that this judge says is in complete contradiction to the history that you just outlined. So the notion that first of all, the did they have signs up that said you couldn't have guns in years past? Yeah, they had those signs up. Do those signs mean anything? No, they mean nothing. They have no legal bearing whatsoever. Rob Dorr was on AM 1280 The Patriot with Jack Tomzak this past weekend and explained in detail the fact that there are statutory limitations to what a organization like the State Fair, which is a state entity, it is not a private organization, it is an entity of the state. There are statutory limitations that explicitly bar such an organization from limiting the rights of residents in Minnesota from carrying a gun if they had the legal ability to do so, which carry permit holders do. And so, let's read through this judgment that Judge Laura Nelson offered when denying this injunction. She said the right to bear arms is not without limits and is subject to reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. That is correct. It is also completely irrelevant to the facts at hand. She went on to say courts have repeatedly recognized a compelling government interest in public safety and specifically in protecting the general public from gun violence. She said the difference this year is that it is not in the rule, but rather the increased likelihood that violating it will be detected due to the additional metal detectors. This factor favors denying the injunction. So her rationale is that, in point of fact, her rationale is that the rule has always been there. Now, what did you just tell us? No, it hasn't. In fact, mere days before this ruling was given out, the fair finally made it official, illegally made it official that this is the rule of the state fair. So she's lying about that. Either she's lying or she's incompetent. And then she completely evades the legal question of whether or not such a rule is legal under statute, which is the whole point. Merely telling me that there's a rule is not the question at hand. The question at hand is, does this entity have the legal authority to make and enforce such a rule? The answer to that is objectively no. But she doesn't even bother to look at the statute or to rule on the statute or its application whatsoever. She just trots out this nonsense about courts having historically weighed the value of the right to bear arms versus considerations of public safety, which is wholly irrelevant. You're not there to make that judgment. You're there to interpret the law. The law says the state cannot do this. That's it. It's clear cut.
Yeah, this is executive overreach. This is agencies making, just ignoring state statute. And it's important to know that you can't just file lawsuits for everything, because lawsuits of this nature cost 30 or $40,000 to do all the paperwork and the attorney's fees involved in it. It is a pain in the butt. So when the state fair kind of just loosely put up a piece of paper saying guns are banned in this premises, all the gun, it's like, do you sue that? No, because you talk to the cops there and you say, look, you guys can't ban guns here, can you? No, we can't. Okay, well, then you just carry and you ignore it. But when they put up metal detectors, then it became clear that they were going to deny people the right to carry a gun. So that's when you sue. And it's unfortunate that they passed the rule in haste, trying to fix this. But uh, it's so clear cut, and I have little faith that the final order is going to be in our favor, but the final ruling. But I would have thought the same thing with you know the governor's executive orders or his lockdown orders. I thought that the judge would find those unconstitutional too.
And again, we go back to what we talked about in previous episode. The courts are not going to save us. They have abdicated their rightful objective constitutional role. They don't see themselves as interpreters of the law as written. They are operating under the premise of critical legal theory. What that judge said in rationale for her ruling is cut and paste from critical legal theory. She didn't cite the law. She didn't even talk about the law. What she said was that courts have long weighed public safety against whatever the law happens to be. What your subjective interpretation of public safety has nothing whatsoever to do with what the law says, but that's what they're doing. So, we again, we need to have a legislative candidates and an executive that are willing to push back against these fallacious and inappropriate judicial rulings.
Well, Walter, now we're going to get into something that we probably don't agree on. Um, the the big news this week was that U.S. regulators gave full approval to the Pfizer COVID vaccine. So up until now, all the vaccines have had emergency use authorization. They're part of like a 3-year study, so they're not supposed to be done for another 2 years. And Pfizer got full approval somehow, and a lot of businesses had been putting in mandates for the vaccine. Well, under Minnesota law, you can't mandate a vaccine if it just has emergency approval. Now that it has full authorization, um, it's the law is clear that businesses can mandate it for their employees. Now, we talked in the last podcast or two podcasts ago how I don't support the government mandating it. I don't want the government mandating it for state employees, and I don't want the government incentivizing or trying to force businesses to mandate the vaccine. And we saw that in the last week with President Biden has said that if you receive federal Medicaid or Medicare dollars, um, that he won't give you that money unless you mandate your workers to be vaccinated. So for long-term care facilities, nursing homes, hospitals, clinics who take insurance for Medicare and Medicaid, which is just about every one of them, they have to now mandate their employees get vaccinated, um, or they don't get money. So this impacts all healthcare workers, right? The people that have been on the front lines in the trenches dealing with COVID. A good percentage of the healthcare workers have actually contracted COVID, right? They went through the disease and built natural immunity, and now they're being told that they have to get vaccinated anyways, even though they have natural immunity. It's frustrating for a lot of them. And in an industry where they're already understaffed, they're dealing with a surge again, and um, they're being told they have to be vaccinated. And there's a lot of people. I think some polls put it at 24% of nurses and healthcare workers that don't want to be vaccinated. And there's a movement around the state to, ask state legislators to prohibit employers from requiring vaccinations. So they're asking, legislators, hey, they want us to say, hey, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? I'm gonna tell businesses what they can and cannot do. And for me, as a legislator that's been in St. Paul fighting every week to stop stupid mandates that were on our businesses, right? Less regulations, more freedom, more liberty. It puts me in a tough situation because now we're being told that we should be mandating something of businesses because it's a conservative position to say they can't require vaccinations of their employees. It makes me feel like a hypocrite if I sign on to legislation that's going to put mandates on businesses. Now, I do not want the government to mandate vaccines, and I'm very clear on that. I don't want I don't want the federal government to also do it through incentivizing people or withholding pay. That's wrong. But I believe that if you got to retire from the factory because you got, um, a lung condition and you want to start a bookstore and you want your employees to be vaccinated, and if you want to write that in a contract with them, you should be able to do that. You might have to pay them more. It might be hard to find people, but if that's what the environment that you want to create for your customers and you as someone that's has health problems, that's a free country, right? I want freedom. I want liberty. I think you should be able to do what you want. And for the state to then negate existing private employment contracts, I feel is wrong. It's like what we're doing with the rental businesses right now where landlords were rewriting their contracts and taking their freedom away. So I have a hard time with so-called conservative legislators out there that are beating the drums to more mandates on businesses and then creating legislation that would have all these bureaucracy around it, because it's not just, you can't just mandate it, but it's also, you can't discriminate based on someone who's not vaccinated, and you can't not give somebody a promotion because they're not vaccinated. And so it extends this legislation that I'm seeing Mortensen that has it threads a lot of this different bureaucracy into employment law.
So there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot going on, and I hopefully I, at the very least, can shed some light into why you've been placed into this awkward position. I have a different perspective, and it stands on kind of three different levels or three different planks. The first is the notion that I see already in precedent that we have reasonable limitations on employment conditions. And I've offered this example before. We offered it in a previous episode. It's a little bit extreme, but it serves the purpose of making my point, which is that, if your employer has as a condition of your employment that you will provide sexual favors to them or other people, that's against the law. And you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who opposes that limitation on employment conditions. The fact that such a restriction exists, and you could call it a mandate to not do that to your employees, the fact that that exists tells me that we all recognize that there is a moral limitation to the types of things that employers can require of their employees in order to maintain their livelihood. So the question becomes not whether or not such a limitation exists, but what ought to qualify as the limitation, and whether or not a vaccine mandate from an employer crosses that line. I would argue that it does, for a couple of reasons. You cannot tell me the business reason, the employment function reason why you need to be vaccinated in order to do any job.
Well, I'll step in there, Walter, because I mean the numbers are clear. You see this with I think Delta Airlines or something came out with a thing saying, if you choose not to be vaccinated, because they didn't go with a mandate, if you choose not to, then you have to pay $200 a month, because they have found that a COVID hospitalization is running on average $40,000. So they're doing the math, and they're saying, you not only can you make other people sick, and I'm not going to argue the science, I'm just putting out their statement. You can make other people sick. There's a risk there. If they have a high number of unvaccinated, maybe people won't fly on their airlines. But their numbers are, if you go to the hospital, it's $40,000. So they're actually just working the numbers, saying you need to be vaccinated for this reason. So there's a financial reason why they want to do it. There's the PR reason, which you and I think is pretty disgusting, right? That we're a vaccinated business or whatever to try to attract marketing, but the same could be said for, well, if you're morbidly obese, you should pay $300 a month.
Correct.
There's Correct. A bunch of other things. Right now, the Affordable Care Act only allows you to charge extra money for people that smoke, and if they're, I think, by an older age. That's it. You can't discriminate based on sex or based on obesity or anything else, or pre-existing conditions. But I wanted to throw that out there, that there is a financial reason why companies would do it. Same reason that my employer, that was the Royal Bank of Canada, required I get a flu vaccine, because they just want to stop a lot of people from being sick in their work. And we work close together. We worked on a trading floor. We were elbow to elbow, and that was what their policy was.
Yeah, but as you point out, that's a cutesy way to try to make it sound like you're not being discriminatory. Because if in fact there is like an actuarial way that you can demonstrate a specific cost for a certain risk, then you factor that into insurance, right? You factor that into your insurance, both on a personal level as an individual who has health insurance, but then the business factors that into their insurance on their end. in order to mitigate any potential risk that they're assuming. The idea that you owe them an arbitrary amount of money each month merely for existing as an unvaccinated person is utterly absurd, which goes to the point of why are they doing this, right? How are they able to do it? Because if we all worked for, Bob's hardware store on the corner of Main Street, if we all worked for sole proprietors who had small businesses on Main Street, this wouldn't be possible, right? You couldn't have Bob decide that he was only going to have vaccinated people work at his store, because nobody would work for him. They would go next door to the person who's sane and who's not going to sacrifice their own business relationships in order to pursue some hypochondriac fever dream.
Yeah, but they can do that now. I mean, that's the argument. What happens when 4% of the nurses leave the workforce or leave the hospital because they're like, no, I'm going to go work for somebody else that isn't going to have this mandate.
For who?
In this job market, where you can't find every company has openings. Why would they want to lose 4 or 5% of the workforce? They won't. If people just said, no, I won't be vaccinated, you have to make reasonable accommodation, then I think employers are going to be stuck. But to go to government and say, hey, government, will you force my businesses to do this or this or this? Now you're asking for government to grow. And why conservatives are like, yes, well, I'll grow government. I'll create an agency that'll do this, and more bureaucracy, more employees.
So I listened to South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem's Facebook post that she put out, which the fact that she had to put this out tells you where she's at politically on this, right? She's on the defensive because she's being attacked from all sides by her own base, by conservatives. And she even named some people by name who are coming for knives out.
Let's just play the video of
Sure.
her speech, because I think that it sums it up, and that's why I send it to you, because it's kind of my position here too. So let's listen to Kristi Noem's response.
There's been some conversation about banning businesses from mandating that employees get vaccinated. And I know that many people are frustrated, but they don't want their employer telling them what to do. I hear you. And that's why I didn't order state employees to get vaccinated. In fact, I banned the state from instituting vaccine passports. Because of our respect for freedom, South Dakota's work ethic is second to none, and our business environment is second to none. Business freedom and individual freedom work together to make South Dakota's economy the strongest in the nation. Now, I have been vaccinated. More than 60% of eligible South Dakotans have been vaccinated against the virus. And I'd encourage every South Dakotan to choose to get vaccinated if you want to. But that's your choice, and it should be your choice. Government shouldn't be mandating it to you. That's why I will oppose President Biden's illegal vaccine mandates. I will take every action available under the law to protect South Dakotans from the federal government. South Dakota has not imposed any mandates. In fact, I was the only governor in America who never ordered a single business or church to close. And frankly, I don't think the businesses should be mandating that their employees be vaccinated either. And if they do mandate vaccines to their employees, they should be making religious and other exemptions available to them. But I don't have the authority as governor to tell them what to do. And since the start of this pandemic, I have remained focused on what my authorities are and what they are not. Now, South Dakota is in a strong position because I didn't overstep my authority. I didn't trample on the rights of our people, and I'm not going to start now. When leaders overstep their authority, that is how we break this country. And if government starts acting unconstitutionally, even if it's doing something that we like, that is a dangerous path to walk down. It will actually lead to the destruction of our Constitution and our nation. We must be a nation of laws, and government must be constrained by the Constitution. It is not conservative to grow government and to tell businesses what to do and how to treat their employees. Most of the Republican legislators in South Dakota, they get that, but there are a vocal few, like John Hanson and Scott Odenbach, who are chasing headlines. and are trying to tell South Dakotans how to do business. They want to make government bigger and more powerful in your life, and it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Know this, that their proposal as written is not conservative. Making government bigger and giving it more power is not conservative. Some business leaders may make decisions that we disagree with, and that happens every single day. Businesses that choose to require vaccinations should do so with the full knowledge that their employees and their future workers, they may have other choices. And workers may be faced with a time when the requirements or values of their employer is inconsistent with their own beliefs. But bringing government into those decisions is not the solution. It won't solve the COVID-19 pandemic, and it won't solve the workforce shortage in our state, and it won't solve the challenges that businesses face. Now, my focus will always be this: ensuring that South Dakota remains a great place to live, to work, to raise a family, and to do business. And let me clarify this. Legislators can call themselves into session if they have support. They don't need me to do it. They just need support of their colleagues. Now, if I start telling South Dakotans how to do business, it will destroy the freedom that made our state so strong in the first place. And South Dakota is strong, and I love it with all my heart. You have a wonderful day.
So she's very much on the defensive. So here's kind of my counter to this, to what she has to say. What she's doing is she's continuing this meme that has been popular in conservative / libertarian circles for decades. And that's the notion of smaller government is better government. And government is bad, and we don't need government in this, and we don't need government in that. Past a certain point, this notion of small government or less government or getting government out of this, that, or the other thing becomes indistinguishable from defund the police. The reason why defund the police is a bad idea is because you need an institution of retaliatory force to respond to the initiation of force. If somebody tries to take my stuff, if somebody tries to carjack me or to rape my wife or to assault my kids, I need to have the capacity, either myself or through an agent of the state, which is the police, to retaliate against that initiation of force appropriately and effectively. What I see here is these corporations that have been granted their status by the state. Corporations are not some natural entity that you can find out in the woods. We create them. They are legal entities that are formed through statute. These corporations are utilizing their status in order to initiate coercion against their employees. They are specifically and intentionally and explicitly saying, we want you to do something against your judgment, and we are holding ransom something of great value to you. It is fundamentally no different than holding a gun to your head and saying, take this vaccine. That is an initiation of force. It is coercion. And so it is appropriate for the state to fulfill its lawful and moral function, which is retaliation against that initiation. We find ourselves in a state of war with institutions at every level in our culture. And when you're in a war footing as opposed to peacetime, you can't engage with the same degree of restraint and decorum that you would during peacetime. You know, you can't when you're being attacked by the barbarians at the gate, you can't take them to court. You have to shoot to kill. That's the position that we find ourselves in institutionally as conservatives and as libertarians and as people who care about individual rights in the United States of America. We're not going to win this war by pretending that there's some path to victory through the status quo. We just talked about how the court ignores the law as written in order to deny you your right to carry a gun. In that context, you're not going to be able to, through application of principle, affect a reality where you get to have your autonomy and your independence and your ability to live your life according to your own judgment and pursue your own happiness. You're going to have to force it. You're going to have to deploy some weapons. And unfortunately, that means state force.
Okay, so I just want to I want to remember this. This is gonna be my ringtone here, Walter, because you're talking about arming the government. You're talking about building up the government, the state, to be the use of force. You, libertarian, you're saying this is where you take on, these businesses by arming the state to come after them, right? I am at the state legislature and I fight against mandates on businesses every single week. And it frustrates me that government is telling us what to do with our private businesses, with our own lives. And now these so-called conservatives are out there saying, we need to tell these businesses what they can and can't do. And I feel like there's a better way. There has to be a better way. So let me find some middle ground here that I think I might be able to bring you back over to my side. Um, Corporations, I will agree that some of these corporations can be faceless. This proposal that I'm hearing about, it applies to all businesses, small businesses, everything. But let's just say that, go after your argument on these big faceless corporations. They're driven by the bottom line, right? They're driven by profits. I believe that there is some coercion by government, some force on these businesses to implement these vaccine requirements. But what I find most frustrating about the whole vaccine business in general was that, if you go back to the 1980s, when we had like 3 or 4 vaccines for children, it was and they were, age old vaccines. And the companies that were manufacturing them would only get about, $2 or $3 per dose. It wasn't like they were profitable. Um, there are um, there are people that die or are permanently injured by vaccines all the time. It's not a high percentage, but it exists in the thousands or tens of thousands a year that are injured from vaccines or paralyzed or die. And the pharmaceutical companies got sick of all the lawsuits, and having to pay out millions and millions of dollars in payments for a death for a vaccine that they, got $2 for. So they went to the government and said, look, we're going to stop making these vaccines, because there's just no money in it. And so the government, Congress, decided to give them immunity from prosecution, for civil and criminal prosecution, for vaccine injuries and deaths. And they set up what's called the vaccine court. And so they charge 50 cents tax on every dose of vaccine. So like an MMR vaccine is three doses, $1.50 goes into a fund to pay for people that are injured. And they set up all these things. If you had these conditions, it was very easy to sue. It wasn't easy, but it was easier than the court of law proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the vaccine caused your injury. If you had all these conditions, then you'd get a payout. And if you weren't satisfied, you could still sue the vaccine manufacturer. Well, the vaccine court was set up. And then another 10 years later, in like 2006, they decided to prevent people from suing if they weren't happy in vaccine court. And then they started limiting the conditions that you could sue for. So it is really hard to get justice through the vaccine court. And Big Pharma is completely immune from prosecution. And now we don't just have 3 or 4 vaccines for kids. We have like 76 different vaccines they have to get. And some of these vaccines, and it's not just kids, for adults too, like the shingles vaccine and things, there's vaccines that are $1,000. And so now we're into this major profitability by vaccine manufacturers. There is no financial incentive to make the vaccines safer. Okay. And so they could stretch out, like they can add these extra metals and stuff in the vaccines. And there's the path to coming up with a pharmaceutical drug is a completely different than a vaccine, because there's no liability over here. And my frustration with this is that they're not liable. And so if you're going to be mandating a vaccine as a business, and there is a risk that you're going to injure or kill your employee, then you should carry the liability if you injure or kill your employee. As a requirement that they work there, if they're required to get a vaccine, then you are now responsible for their injury, much in the same way that a few years ago, I wrote a bill because I was frustrated with the "do not carry a gun on our premises" signs that were popping up at the grocery store chains and such. I wrote a bill to say, I respect private property rights. You can hang a sign saying that I can't carry a gun at your grocery store, but then you assume the liability of protecting me if a gunman comes in, and shoots and kills me. It's a rare instance, but that's the reason why I carry a gun, in case it happens. So if you're going to say I can't carry a gun, then you have to protect me. I respect your property rights, but you take the liability. So that's the same thing I'm doing here with legislation that I'm writing for the special session, to say businesses that mandate these vaccines for their employees as a condition of employment take on the responsibility if there's any injury or harm to that employee because of the vaccine. And it cannot be part of the workman's comp, which is this whole socialist thing. So it has to be basically an insurance policy that the business would have to take out to cover that, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 5,000 employees that, dies or is permanently injured by the vaccine.
So I don't oppose that at all. I think that's a great measure that should be pursued, regardless of the question of whether or not we ought to ban businesses mandating their employees to take the vaccine. I think that there are two aspects of justice. You're speaking to the civil realm of civil liability, which is the notion that you have committed a tort against me. You have damaged me in a financial way, in a way that can be financially compensated. And therefore, I'm going to seek restitution through the civil judicial system. What I'm talking about is criminal justice. As an employer or a manager, it's one thing for me to, through negligence or through some form of requirement or action to have placed to create a risk, an unnecessary risk to my employee. It's quite another for me to, through an act of coercion, by threatening their job, say, you will engage in this act that I know to be dangerous or you will lose your job. If I do that and that person gets hurt or killed, I'm going to jail. I'm not just going to be sued. I'm going to serve time because that is criminal. And that's what I'm arguing, is that this is criminal. I don't want to wait for the person to get sick or to die or to be harmed in some way by a vaccine that in their judgment they didn't want to take. They deserve justice, not by virtue of the fact that they were forced to take it, but by virtue of the fact that they were placed in a position that they were coerced to take it. That's the crime. Go ahead.
We're at-will employees. I mean, there are things that change all the time where you say, you know what, we're going to change your shift hours. You have to come in at noon
Right.
and work until 8 p.m. And you're like, no, you can't make me do that. You're like, you know what, you're right. You don't have to work here. And I just feel like if there was a small percentage, 3% of the workforce just stood up and said, no, no. Or just to say, you know what, I had the disease. I have natural immunity, which is by many studies better than the vaccine. So, you can't make me take a vaccine because I'm already immune. Fire me if you want to, but I'll take you to court. And have an employer go, well, gosh, you know what? You're a really good employee. I don't want to, it's going to take you 8 months to train somebody up to my level to take over. So no, the employers will back off if people just stand up. And that's what part of these protests all over the state for, the stop the mandates. I wish they weren't looking to government to be that, the bully to come in there and grow and say, we're going to control businesses. Be that movement yourself. Stand up to the employers.
But that raises the question, Jeremy, of why is this what they're asking for? Why are conservatives, such as myself, asking for this to go in the direction that we're asking it to go? It's because we have completely lost confidence in our institutions. We don't believe that the nickel and dime market impact that you're talking about of a few people saying they're not going to go along with it and threatening to quit or threatening to walk away is going to be effective, because we see the coordination between the state agencies, litigation, lawyers, big business, insurance companies. There is a collusion that is taking place with institutional players that collectively hold coercive power over the little guy. And that's what you see right now. The politics of the future, the politics of this moment is a politics, and we saw it start to birth or kind of manifest with Donald Trump. It's no longer going to be this sort of conservative, liberal, right wing, left wing type of divide. Those divides still exist, and they will. But the new meaningful fault lines are populist in nature. It's between the little guy who's getting bowled over by everyone above him who has any type of institutional power and those institutions. And the people who decide to be on the side of the little guy, even if it means growing government, quote unquote, are going to be the political victors. At least that's the way I see it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, what happens when the same group of people that's out there pushing back against the mandates say, well, we want $25 an hour wages. That's the minimum wage. I mean,
Sure.
Where does it stop? Where do you just say, you know what? Negotiate with your employer. You guys have the power. If you're united and you walk out, your employer's going to change their mind.
So, I mean, I don't want to get too far off track, but there's a principle there, right? So the question is coercion and where the coercion lies. When government becomes the coercer, which is saying you should, because what the minimum wage does is it doesn't retaliate against an initiation of coercion. What it does is it tells two parties who are willing to engage in a transaction that they can't do it. It says, you want to work for $11 an hour. He wants to pay you that $11 an hour, but we aren't going to let that happen, right? That's a categorically different thing than my employer is telling me, I'm going to take your livelihood away and put you in a position where your kids can't eat and you can't pay your mortgage unless you put a drug in your body. Just categorically, those are two different things in my view.
Yeah, but what if your grandmother was in a nursing home and she was, immunocompromised, and you want to make sure that you're putting her in a nursing home that is surrounded by healthcare workers that are vaccinated. You want to find that one place that requires it of their workers and maybe differentiates itself from other employers. Why can't we allow business owners to create that environment? And I go back to the small businesses or whatever, but I want freedom. I don't want government to come in and start setting up all these rules, because we have to also remember, when we set up the structure around what businesses can and cannot do, it just starts to grow from there. The legislation that Mortensen proposed is specific to COVID, but once you open that door, then you can, it can be a slew of other things.
So I got news for you. The door has been opened, right? Like we're so far past that point of the door having been opened. And so I think what Mortensen, and I haven't talked to him about his bill. I haven't even read his bill. But I think where he's operating from politically is premised to some extent on the will to power and the notion that we're at a point, when, again, going back to our conversation about the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus and the state fair and having a judge rule against them, completely ignoring the words of the statute and just making up a rationale for why she's not going to engage in this injunction. What that tells you is that the law doesn't matter. The Constitution doesn't matter. The only thing that matters ultimately is political will, the will to power, the will to say we're this far, no further, and to push back against whoever is your enemy in any given circumstance. And that's where we're at. We're at a point where conservatives and people who previously have been preaching the gospel of limited government recognize that that's cute and all, but the government hasn't been limited for a very long time, and it's not going to get limited anytime soon. And so in the meantime, the question becomes, what kind of world, what kind of practical reality are my children going to live in right now, today? And that's a reality that's defined by institutional force. And so we either seize that and turn it towards our own ends, or we become victims of it. And I think that's what you're seeing. And you're absolutely right. You're 100% correct that comes with all sorts of cautionary warnings, and we need to tread carefully. And we need to be asking ourselves, having these debates, asking ourselves, what are the limitations? What are the principles that we should be bringing to bear? But I'm telling you, the nature of these debates is trending away from the kind of Mises, Cato style academic musings towards something that looks a heck of a lot more like Tucker Carlson, for better or worse.
I fear hypocrisy, and I don't want to be caught in that. I'm fighting against the governor's executive orders. I'm fighting against his mandates. I'm fighting against government mandates. And then all of a sudden I chase that down to, I'm fighting against this mandate. Well, what's it? It's a private employer. He can't do that. I don't want to be fighting against, or telling businesses what they can do, because I want to lower regulations in our state for everybody. And I feel like we've been tricked into this, and the left is just laughing, watching conservatives or so-called conservatives out there championing mandates on businesses.